I'd rather create something that others criticise than create nothing and criticise others.
If you have high quality product behind the bar, it's like a weapon.
It's not about the figures. It's about who those figures are.
The Hospopreneurs Podcast.
I'm going to drink this beer.
Yeah, let's crack them.
With James Henderson.
Hello and welcome to episode 68 of the Hospopreneurs Podcast. Kim Teo joins us today to share her experience in the startup world and how she's applied it to hospitality with her digital menu application, Mr. Yum. During capital raising, Mr. Yum attracted the attention of angel investors, bar and restaurant owners, and Oz Venue Co. to quickly and confidently cover the 700,000 Australian dollars they originally aimed for. Kim is also the co-founder of Pitchblak, a startup incubator based in Melbourne, and is active in the Australian startup community. Hello and welcome to the show, Kim.
Hi, how are ya?
Excellent. Thank you for joining us today.
It's good to be here.
Absolutely. I'm really looking forward to getting into the episode. The first question, as you know, is what is your crazy hospitality story?
I haven't been in hospitality for very long, so I actually felt a little bit awkward saying yes to this podcast, as you would know. I guess my crazy hospitality story is just actually like stumbling into it 3 months ago. You know, I eat out every single meal. Like, I can't even imagine how much money I've spent on hospitality in the last years. But really working in it and becoming passionate about it has been something I've stumbled into. And it's really incredible what can happen when you surround yourself with crazy hospitality people and people that are so passionate in the industry. You can really gravitate towards it because it's like an exciting space that you can like live and breathe and enjoy and feel, and you can almost be so much a part of it without being a part of it, and then stumbling into it you really get drawn into it.
What was it that really drew you in then?
I mean, I've been in technology for a while, always spotting problems and trying to solve problems, and eating out every day we just noticed a customer-centric problem that we stumbled into, which is around people are visual and we're looking at menus that are over 200 years old in the current text format that it is, which is crazy. We actually pulled up like these old menus from Europe and from like Asia that are 200 years old, and they're exactly the same as what they are today. So we thought, what would happen if we would put some more helpful things on menus and help us make decisions around what to order? And that includes photos and ingredient descriptions, because instead of, you know, people pull out their phones and Google stuff when they're sitting at a restaurant that they don't understand the menu. Translations is a big thing. If you're reading a menu and you literally don't understand English, you default straight to looking on Zomato or Google Images for photos. So I guess we saw a problem around why are menus that are completely text-based actually so unhelpful when people are visual. And we go on Instagram or we like look around the room. We call that food perving. We're like staring at what other people are getting because we're trying to suss out. We're like visual people and we're copping this text-based menu. So we were like, what would happen if we put the two together? And that's how we stumbled into the industry.
Well, before we get into exactly what that is and what you're building, I'd like to ask on a macro level why you do what you do.
I'm really addicted to solving problems, and in doing that, helping industries, people, businesses. And we've always done things in like lifestyle and culture and arts and music, and it's around like how do we create better experiences, and hospitality is such a good place to do that.
Why is hospitality a great place to do that?
It's just like, it is something you do 3 times a day, where it's like the most magical connections are built over a drink, a great dinner. A romance is often formed over hospitality, great friendships, great group networks and connections. It's an emotional thing that people can connect over and get excited about. I love the industry because it's fun and it's engaging and people are emotionally connected to it.
100%. And the romantic nature of the industry can more easily be seen from the guest's perspective. There are hospitality professionals listening who 100% know night after night it's not always that romantic. There are really hard times. There have been stories on the show, crazy hospitality stories, or just anecdotes from guests about really hard times too. So I'm really interested to hear over this episode those sorts of insights that you have coming in from another perspective into the industry, because that brings its own value as well. So tell us a bit about what you're building.
We're building a startup called Mr. Yum. The application of technology in hospitality is quite far behind other industries, and other industries have become more efficient and transformed themselves over time because of the use of technology. And hospitality has, I think, been one of the last ones to evolve. A lot of it's for good reason, because you go to these venues and bars and restaurants to make memorable connections, right? So to be hospitable is almost like an art form in itself. So I can understand why it's been so tough for technology to get in and actually like not take away from hospitality, but add to it. So Mr. Yum at the moment, it is a free digital menu, which is a product that you can look at, and it's visual, so it's photo based. There's photos of every single dish. There's definitions and language translations, and we've really created what we think is the most helpful tool for helping people decide what to order. And then we can evolve to do lots of other cool things like ordering and even personalization. So your Mr. Yum menu should look really different to mine, because I'm going to like different cocktails to you. And I only really ever get like 2 or 3 different cocktails. And I don't understand why I have to go through a list of 20 different cocktails when every single time I'll either get something that's vodka or gin based with passion fruit, or I'll get an old fashioned. Those are the only 2 things that I get, but I always get presented with massive menus that I have to go through. So the concept is, from a customer point of view, it's how can we create some really personalized menus, one that understands you and understands your buying behavior and understands what you like. And then from a business point of view, how can we create a product that actually helps upsell and helps get the drinks and the food out to the customer faster, and then as a byproduct maybe reduce some labor costs in the meantime.
So at the moment, how does it help guests decide what to buy?
Yeah, so when you're researching a restaurant, deciding to whether to go there or not, venues have started to change their menu link on Google over to their Mr. Yum menu. So instead of looking at a text-based PDF menu, you get presented with a visual menu that's got photos of every single dish next to the item descriptions and the price.
Yes.
It's interactive. You can click on it. You can click on words that you don't understand to reveal the description.
I thought that was really cool.
Yeah, because it's confusing. Like, there's always a word in a menu that you don't get.
People are embarrassed to ask. That's the thing.
I'm so glad you said that, because hospitality purists think that their staff are trained to answer the questions, but it's not that their staff aren't trained, it's that people don't ask.
It could actually help train staff around the menu. If there's something that there's a confusing Italian word that no one knows, or like they should know but don't, they don't have to be embarrassed. They can pull up their own menu and be like, oh, what does that mean again? And they can check.
Exactly, yeah.
Right? I think there are a lot of real benefits to this particular application. I'd like to know where you built, I guess, a mentality around innovation and startups.
I think I just find it really exciting when you're doing something that you're carving out new territory and you're doing something that could really shape and help an industry, but no one's really done it before and in exactly the same way. It's almost addictive a little bit when you're doing something new every day, talking to interesting people and learning new things that you didn't know yesterday. It is hard. Like, we've done startups together before, and there's a very small, almost margin between getting it right, absolutely knocking out of the park, and then actually completely failing. So risk for sure. Don't know why we do what we do. I really feel like people that do startups are just somewhat addicted to doing something that hasn't been done before.
So one of your previous ventures did start to go quite well. So tell us more about the experience you had.
That was actually how we met each other.
Yep.
So I had a startup called Neighbor Flavor. Very simple concept. You can buy home cooked food from people that lived around you. Pre-Deliveroo, pre-Uber Eats, pre a lot of the convenience models that exist today. And it went so well from like a hype campaign perspective. We had like 5,500 pre-registrations and Channel 7 news and all this PR that we didn't really sign up for. That was my first kind of app. I had an e-commerce business before that I sold, but this was my first kind of real app technology product. And it ended up being that it was an illegal business, so you can't actually cook in your home and sell the food that you make. Pretty brave to think that we could do what Uber was doing and start to change the regulations. But we did get some good indications. Like, we had the public policy head of Uber on our team advising us on what to say and trying to help us change regulations. But long story short, we ended up in the US for 3 months and realized that the business model was really flawed and that cooks can't actually cook enough in their home to create a business out of it. And without that, the model is very unsustainable.
Obviously through that, there were an incredible number of benefits
Yeah.
that would have come from that as well. So what did you learn out of that experience?
My number one learning was that reaching out to people has just the biggest snowball effect that you could ever imagine. Like asking for help has been the thing that has gotten me everywhere in my career. Just even a cold LinkedIn message, a cold email, like it is amazing what people are willing to do to help. So that's probably my first learning. We wouldn't have ended up in New York for 3 months if we didn't reach out to what definitely was a competitor at the time. Most people will like stay the hell away from competitors. They're like, we reached out to a competitor who was 2 years ahead of us, just raised $2 million on a cold email. They ended up flying to Australia actually for 4 days. And then we ended up living there for 3 months working with them. So my biggest learning is that if you have a lot of questions, just like try and find the best people who've done it before and can help. And they're often really willing to help. James, do you mind if I ask you a question?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Ask away.
Reverse podcast. If there were like 100 most gangster hospitality people in a room tomorrow,
Yeah.
and they all had to put on a piece of paper and then talk about, you know, what they think are the most interesting and exciting things that are about to happen in the industry around innovation, what do you think those 3 things would be?
That is a very good question. That concept is actually something that I'm looking at doing through Hospopreneurs, ultimately. Cool. I haven't even reached episode 100, so we've got a little bit to go. But the 3 things that they would say about innovation, how specific would you like the answer to be? Because I know that they would talk about social media, absolutely the biggest factor that's changed the game for hospitality. There are different types of innovations. So you could think about innovation from a marketing standpoint. I think about it as almost external and internal. One is a product innovation, another one is like a marketing innovation.
Yeah.
You also have these leaps in innovation that don't just use a technology more efficiently, but absolutely revolutionize how an industry operates. And that's how I define innovation, is when it revolutionizes it, not just when it's a tweak to a technology that makes it run more efficiently. It's all going to be computer systems driven. The internet obviously changed the game, but social media is another factor that's then built on that. So it depends on what sort of level we're looking at that innovation.
Feels like social media has like come, right? It's been around for 10 years probably, and the impact on the industry is no doubt that people choose where they go based on what social media is telling them to do. The influencer thing feels like it's come and maybe has less of an impact now than it did previously. Like it feels like it came in a big wave and then it didn't really find a sustainable place in the industry.
So on influencers, for example, it's still huge, it's massive, and it's really just another term for things that have existed before. They're like mini PR people, really. So the way that I've seen influencers operating just on this, and to keep it related to hospitality as well, the way I've seen this working, because this has been happening with me as the Hospopreneurs podcast has grown as well. I don't know what point we'll be at when this episode comes out, but from how it's been at this point of recording, PR agencies reach out to guys like myself to then be involved in certain projects and whatnot, because I don't like to call myself an influencer. That's the role that I have been playing, because that's what we do. We are mini PR people for specific markets now. Now that I've sort of been processing that question from before, the internet's really changed the game hugely, changed everything. And then social media has changed the game in a different way. I'm looking at things like chatbots and all these little tools that people can use that can really change the interaction that people have within the industry. But I think the biggest factor that is yet to change the game, that is going to be gamification. 100%. I think that's the call I'm going to make.
I love that.
I think that that's the thing.
And do you think it's like turning the experience into a game? Yeah.
Yep, totally. Can you describe to listeners what gamification is?
There's actually a really interesting book called Hooked, and it's all about product development and about how you create an addictive product. I know we're not trying to create Facebook. Misty is actually the opposite to addictive. We want people to like use it, get off it, and like not use it. The point of it is to get back to your interactions. The point isn't to spend 15 minutes on Misty, it's to help you make a decision really quickly. But products like toothpaste, one of the biggest things is like a loop. There's 4 things, and one of them is a variable reward. So to get people interested and intrigued and coming back to a product, you actually have to give them them a reward that's variable, which means they don't get the same thing every time, and it keeps them wanting more. So with hospitality, there's a level of gamification around, you ask the bartender and you say, can I have something that's like this, and like that? And they give you something that's interesting and you don't expect it, which is like, that's the variable.
Yes, without drawing way too far from gamification. The point in that is that you have to ride this line between, so if someone says, can you make me a drink? And a lot of people will do this, and it's, bartenders, if they're honest, will be like, okay, there are a lot of questions to come now, right?
Yes.
There are things that you like. We need to know the things you like to make you a drink that you're probably going to like.
Yes.
If they're honest about their answers, it becomes about asking better questions. You ask better questions, you get better answers. So I like to ask some questions from that point. But you have to ride this line between, and I ask this, how familiar do you want it to be versus how interesting or exciting or different do you want it to be? So you have to ride this line because people want something familiar that's new, and that's how they respond to new products. Like, it can't be too wacky or it won't resonate with them. They won't respond to it. And I know that you know that very well through working with startups. So I'd like to hear your thoughts on that as well.
People want to try new things. I think genuinely, especially in Australian culture, there's so many different types of food and so many different types of experiences, but we do also want it to be aligned with what we know that we're a little bit familiar with, which is why when I talked about personalization, and you could put maybe gamifications and you can almost build it into a product like Mr. Yum, which is like, how does it recommend you something but not the same thing every time? Like, yes, I like spicy food, but I don't really want you to only recommend spicy things to me. And the good thing is, like, AI and machine learning can do it. It can actually like create enough of a bedrock that it's familiar to you, but also enough of randomization that you get something different every time that you're willing to try because it often gets it right. And the way that works is essentially through enough data points and big data, right? Like, if there's enough people similar to you, these are all the other things they like, and it starts to piece together things that you could like even though you've never tried it before. Asking good questions and asking better questions, that's something that really trained bartenders like yourself are able to do, but not everyone in hospitality does. And so therefore there's such a gap between really, really good gamification level of service that surprises and delights versus like stock standard, everyone gets the same exact recommendation.
Yes, because you wouldn't want to hop on something, for example, like Mr. Yum, and you see your recommendation is the same as someone else's recommendation. Like for drinks, for example, there are so many options. I understand if you've got a food menu, then that's what you've got on the food menu, and people don't want to be making too many things, crazy things off the menu. But in a bar, you've got all these options available. As a bartender, you're drawing on your knowledge of what you have in front of you or behind you, right? To create something in the next few minutes for someone in front of you. And it's this amazing experience to be able to produce something that surprises and delights someone. And that's something that really, ultimately, everyone in the whole industry should be trying to do at all times. That is our job. I think about hospitality professionals as professional friend makers. And you need to be someone who is good at making friends really quickly in this industry. And you don't just need to be that, but if you are particularly good at it, then you will be successful in the industry. So I know I'm gonna turn that into like this double, triple barrel question. So if we come back to gamification, to summarize, for those who are still confused after this conversation about what gamification actually is, to summarize it, it's using game mechanics within a business to inspire some sort of behavior. The reason I think it's the future is because, to me, it's the logical step on social media. We see these social media or like large tech companies buying game companies as well. I think that's what they're thinking about. How can we inspire human behavior? How can we understand the psychology of users to make them addicted to using whatever it is that they're producing?
I know. Some of me cringes a little bit, but...
Yeah. You got to think about addiction. And people in society should be considering how addiction operates now and how it works, and trying to work with tools to deal with that, because we are addicted to technology. Technology is affecting us. It affects us every day. We're using technology now. As a listener, you're using technology to listen to this.
My average screen time is appalling.
Yeah. I saw it start coming up on my new phone, and it's like...
I'm like, I don't want to know.
No. We've gone deep down the gamification route.
Yes.
Was there anything you want to wrap up on gamification before I move on to the next question?
I think that there's an opportunity with combining human-led and technology-led experiences to like really make the before you go somewhere, how could that be more exciting while you're there? And then the post, the life cycle of going out for a food or beverage experience. I think there's so much opportunity to create surprise and delight in the whole value chain, and humans can do that to some level. Technology can also aid that. And it'll be a combination of clever bartenders like you and consistency of technology.
Yes, I won't reveal all my ideas around gamification, but I've got some cool things that I think could definitely be happening. But glad we had a chat about gamification, because that's one of my favorite things. I think that it's definitely going to revolutionize the industry. Before I go on to the next topic, I want to wrap up with another thing there that you touched on about competitors when you were with Neighbour Flavour. Stepping back out into a new topic here. Talking about Neighbour Flavour, you had this competitor that you contacted. What's your mentality around competitors?
They either do one of two things. They're either really receptive and really open-minded, and they'll propel you forward in ways that you can never get from not contacting them. Standing on the shoulder of giants, right? Like, why would you make exactly the same mistakes that they made when they started 2 years ago, when you can just learn from what they did and actually make a step change in the area that you're both tackling? They tend to be people that are very like-minded to you. If they're literally working on very similar concepts and really similar ideas, they tend to be very similar individuals, so you're probably going to like them. The alternative to that is like sometimes you do meet people that are really closed and they don't want to have anything to do with you, and that's totally okay, and you just have to accept that and walk away. I don't want to be crazy naive and say that I would ever reveal everything to a competitor, but the guys in New York actually taught me a term called hyper-transparency, which is that often the more that you share, the more people think you know way more than what you've just shared. So you actually become a thought leader in their minds by just teaching them one or two things that they didn't know, and they think you know like 10 things that they don't know, even if those are the only two things that you knew that they didn't know. So just by almost being ballsy enough to teach them a few things, it often puts you in the leadership position in their minds, which I guess from a competition point of view is a good thing. So I would always be willing to reach out to a competitor, never expecting them to be that open-minded, but when you do find the right people, it is like magic. With Mr. Yum, for example, there was a startup in Sydney called Table, and they launched probably about 2 years before us, recently got acquired by an enterprise company, so not doing the same thing anymore, and their apps got taken off the App Store, and I'm like, what is going on here that is so interesting? Reached out to them, they didn't reply, they're probably too busy, and I found another way to get to them through an intro. I've spoken to them on the phone like probably for 6 hours over the last 3 weeks, and they've just been the most helpful individuals, like helpful guys. And I really want to try and get them a win. Like, we're talking about giving them a small stake in Mr. Yum to help us over the next few years and try and give them a win on something that they were fighting so hard to do, but they probably started just a little bit too early. One example is because they were doing at-table ordering at bars and restaurants, they tried 50 different gadgets to put on the table, like stickers and all these different ways of letting people know about the product, and they've found one that works the best, and they've just told us exactly what that thing is. Like, I don't need to try all these other things that they've tried. I can just do, and it may not be perfect, but I can at least iterate from a starting point that was above what they started, right? So it might not be perfect. We might try another 5 and find an even better one, but I'm starting from not ground zero, I'm starting from fucking 50 ahead, you know? So that is the perfect example of what speaking to competitors can do.
Yes. In that answer there, you touched on a topic that a lot of people I find are close-minded about, and that's giving away equity in your business, right? So can you explain when you should and shouldn't give away equity in a business?
If someone invests in you, you should definitely give them equity. That tends to be the case. Aside from money, which money is the most straightforward way of buying equity in a company, there's ways that people can gain equity by helping, whether that's through sales and distribution, giving you access to channels that you didn't have access to before, whether it's mentoring you through a particular, like for us, point of sale integrations is going to be a massive challenge. And we know that. We've got a guy in the States actually who's been doing POS integrations for longer than I could ever imagine staying in that world. But he's talking to us about some advisory equity and probably putting in some money as well. And then just these table guys, legends that want to help us accelerate our journey. And they've built some cool tech things that we might be able to use. So the easiest way to decide if they're not putting in capital, the first thing would be decide if you want that person on your team long term. And if the answer is yes, there's actually some really good mechanisms in place that you can do that will allow you to give them equity but not upfront. It's called vesting. So it means that you can give them their 1% or 2% over 2 or 3 or 4 years. And it means that they continue to have to add value to you over that period of time. So if they're saying they can do X, Y, and Z, like don't give them equity on the basis of them saying that they can do all those things. Go into an agreement where you say, we'll give you that equity over 3 years. And if they're not delivering, then you just kick them out. And the equity that they will receive at that point is linear to the time frame that they were meant to have their shares vested over.
Perfect.
Yeah, it's super simple, very easy to understand for both parties. Like I see people try and do KPIs and stuff. It's so hard to do KPIs on day one of your business relationship. You could make it like 3 distribution channels, but maybe 1 was better than 3. Maybe you didn't need 3, maybe you only needed 1 gangster one and it created a 5x return on your business already, right? Figuring out KPIs actually is really hard, but saying that the relationship is going to last 3 years and that if we continue to add value to each other over the next 3 years, that we're happy to stay in the relationship, like that's a really simple mechanism.
Perfect. Great answer. Thank you. I'd like to ask you about the innovations you've seen taking place in the industry coming in from outside perspective.
I think that there's so much innovation around food. The industry has been so good at creating, especially in Melbourne where I'm living, the food there is so freaking good. It is like some of the best in the world for the price that you pay. So I think the innovation in food, like I commend them 110%. There is some innovation in processes and in kind of back of house stuff, but there is very little innovation around the customer dining experience. Not that much that has changed. You go into a cafe, you sit your ass down, they come over to you, they ask you what you want, if you have some questions. Like it literally hasn't changed. I reckon if we went back 150 years, that would be exactly what happened 150 years ago.
Yeah, the customer experience hasn't changed entirely because it is so human-centric.
Yeah.
To provide a hospitality experience, people have in their mind that there's a human involved. I personally think that a lot would be lost by losing it to technology or a robot serving you. Or
Of course.
Right?
But would it be crazy if you went into a place and they knew who you were?
They should.
Right? Like,
If they're
why is
doing
it
their
that they
job,
don't
they
know? Why is it that they don't know my name? Why is it that they don't know that I've been there before? Why do you have to ask me if I've been here before? Why do you not know that I previously had the chef's menu and I really didn't like these 3 things? Like everything else is becoming so personalized that hospitality hasn't done that because there's no way of capturing that data.
What will happen is the technology will change the game for the masses. It'll change the game for that bulk human experience. So you can walk into a high volume venue and they know who you are, right?
How do you
Having
think
said
that will be?
you might have an application or your phone just knows where you've been, or I can't work out exactly how that's going to work. I don't know what people are going to create in that experience, but I can see how it's going to change the game for the venues where it's hard to be hospitable. It's very challenging to be hospitable in those environments as a host, right? But the true hospitality experience still involves human-to-human interaction. So when someone walks into a venue that I operate, and I've seen them before, I welcome them back. And I say, hey, welcome back. Another gin and tonic. Like, bang. Hey, welcome back, John. How's the espresso martini you ended up with last time?
Yeah.
And they're like, oh, great.
It's just that it's so hard to scale that, right? Like it's so
Totally.
hard to make sure that James is always there at the time that he's there and you happen to be at the bar that he's always at, or she, right? Like I think that you should be replicable in that the information that you've learned about that person, you should be able to pass on to the other people that work at that bar.
Yes, that would be good. We're dealing with ideas, playing with ideas.
Yeah.
What if, someone can walk up to the counter, they've got an app on their phone and it reads with the POS, and then when you're speaking with that that person, it's like that person's name is Kylie. And then you're like, hi Kylie, welcome back. Saw last time you got this. Like the thing is people want to be remembered.
They want to be remembered.
Acknowledged and appreciated, and they want to feel important. And that's what we do. As hospitality professionals, we make people feel important.
Yeah, and I do not think that technology will replace the smile of a human.
Totally.
Or the banter of a human.
Yeah.
But I think it can do so much to help hospitality gurus like yourself, because you just can't pass on, you leave a venue and all the information is gone with you.
Unless you've done your job training staff.
Yeah, but you can't train them about every single person that's walked in the door that you remembered over the last 3 years,
That's right.
It's like as if you went on Kroger and you bought a vacuum cleaner. Imagine every staff member trying to remember that that's what you bought, but data can remember that.
So what it could do then is devalue the IP that a staff member brings to a business, which is a shame.
Oh, you could do so much more with you. If you had that information about an individual, you would elevate the experience 10x. Like if you could see that person ordered 3 gin-based drinks before and like 2 vodka things and maybe one random thing that they didn't really like, you could, without even like asking them the right questions, you could like create a magical experience that's surprise and delight.
To begin with, but then people will expect that every time. They'll walk in and they'll go, I have that app. They know everything about my experiences that I've had at these venues, at every venue, even at that cafe down the road or across the world. And then they'll go, oh, I was expecting something better. I was expecting a magical experience and all I got was a good one.
It is going to be hard to keep upping it.
People's expectations will adapt. When someone walks in the door, they are saying, give me a good time.
Honestly, like there'll be something else crazy that will happen in some other... Yeah, I think that where we're at now is honestly like so far away from even that being possible. Like we are so far off that being possible because there just isn't a way of bars knowing, unless James is there, what that person ordered from someone that wasn't James before. Like,
I won't know what they ordered from someone who wasn't me, but I pay very close attention. My job is to keep people safe and happy. And to do that, part of making people happy is remembering who they are, making them feel important. They bring a new friend in and you have to make sure that it wasn't the friend from last time. Is it the same friend from last time? You got to weigh that up and you got to remember that. You remember everything about every guest. And yes, there's a lot of things to remember, but that's your job. Like that's your job as a good host. Yes, that can be facilitated by some sort of CRM. That is the...
you go to a fancy dining restaurant, right? You go to like a fancy place and they give you a wine book that's 300 pages. I'm like, this is the worst experience. Going through a wine book with 300 pages. No one likes that experience because A, they're like watching as you choose how expensive the bottle of wine is that you're wanting to buy. And B, like if you're not a sommelier, like you're just all a little bit confused by just the enormity of this selection. I would much rather just the sommelier coming up to me and going, hey, saw that you like these things. I would recommend these 3 bottles.
You can do that.
You can, but they have to ask you what would seem to be questions that are fairly stock standard. And honestly, some people don't answer them truthfully.
What's a truthful or dishonest answer to a question like that?
People want to be seen to spend certain amounts of money at finer dining places.
Well, then it is what they wanted.
It's not what they wanted, but it's what they think they need to say to the sommelier to not be embarrassed.
I'm loving the free-form chat that I don't often get to have with some of my guests, but without further ado, I'd like to crack on to the rest of the episode. Just a few more questions before we wrap things up. I'd like to know, with Pitchblak, how you create a space that allows other people to be creative.
It's a great question. Like we do that for the team and we do that for the founders that we work with, I'd like to think. I would say the first one is to allow people to dream and try and create the opportunity to have the conversation around like if constraints weren't a thing, what could we do? Because if you don't figure out that, then you can never figure out the path to getting there. And even though that could be something that's 15 years away, that's still something that you're making steps towards getting there if you know what that end thing is. So I love the conversation with people around like what would the world look like if there weren't these constraints that we put on ourselves around the practicalities of business. I think for founders, they come in with lots of energy. It's very exciting when you've got an idea that you're working on for the first time. So we have to allow them to think big and to dream. And then our job is to then create with them what is actually the most viable first version of their product, which is very constrained. We have to say, cool, this is the vision. And actually that's something that entrepreneurs all need to learn to do. It's pitch the vision and then figure out what your first version of your product is. But don't really worry so much about what the next 10 steps are to getting there, because you just never know.
What resources have you been using to learn about the industry?
Probably the number one resource has just been people like yourself. I learn a lot about non-industry specific skills around building great products and innovation and doing hard things and all those step change things from podcasts and books, but really to be able to piece together what the industry is like at this moment in time, I found speaking to people just the most helpful. And that is the case of one person onto the next, We're hitting up one person, for example, up in Brisbane for a day, reached out to Frank, who owns Long Time and Honto and all those places, just randomly reached out on LinkedIn and we caught up with him this morning. Did the same with the guy who owns Dagani, who's the chairman of that cafe franchise business, and he was really, really switched on and really sweet. So yeah, both of those just came from just reaching out to people cold.
I back that 100%.
Yeah.
I think people are the most valuable resource in this industry. From your perspective, what do you think are the key drivers of success in hospitality?
The product and the price point. If you can nail those two things and just deliver such amazing quality food for like a pretty competitive price, especially in Melbourne where it's so competitive, I think you've got a massive chance at success. And then the second is service. I do not understand how you can sit there for like 10 minutes with your wine glass not full. Why haven't you been asked if you want another one, or why are you looking around the room trying to get someone's attention to pay for another $14 glass of wine?
Totally.
So first is nailing the product, and then second is making the experience really memorable.
Ultimately, where is it that you want to be?
That's a great question. I don't know the answer to that. I was talking to Adrian, my partner, last night, and I can't stop thinking about it. I have a bit of an obsession with this challenge around in startups, you back ideas and you back startups. And I have a bit of an obsession around how do you back individuals? Because people with money will pass on ideas because they don't think the idea is good, even if they like the founder, even if they like the entrepreneur, and then the person doesn't really get a chance to succeed. But if you back the person and you know that at some point they're going to crack it because they're a super hustler and they just are a good leader and they get shit done and they make things happen, at some point they're going to crack it and succeed. So this is not hospitality related, but I think that if in my lifetime I can figure out how do you create a model where you can back individuals, not buy a share of them, but invest in them and invest in something that doesn't matter whether it's this idea, the next or the one after, that you get some kind of return. I think that far more young people will get a win earlier in their career.
I like that. My very last question is, who would you like to hear on the show?
I recently met a guy called Leon, he's the GM of Proud Mary, and he's also doing an MBA, so he's been in that world for probably 12 years, but now he's just had this different lens put over his eyes around looking at trends, and it's almost like he's been captured in hospitality for so long and then very recently have had to open up to more than just what's going on in his world. And he's got some really interesting insights around the hardest things about hospitality and what he thinks can get the industry out of it. So very respected. Everyone that I speak to speaks very, very highly of him. So yeah, I think it'd be really interesting to speak to.
Awesome. Thank you very much for being on the show today, Kim.
No worries.
Cheers.
The show today was produced by the in-house audio team at Hospopreneurs, led by Jake Olver. Voiceovers were by Angus Brennan. To learn more, head to hospopreneurs.com.